Everything you've been told about death is a lie. It is not an ending, not a silence, not a question that only faith can answer. More than 1,000 years ago, a sacred map was hidden, buried inside a forbidden manuscript, kept from the world. This map lays out in haunting detail what happens in the first 49 days after you die. Known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this ancient guide was once reserved only for those awakened enough to look beyond fear and illusion. It does not describe death as a final breath, but as the entrance to a trial, a test of consciousness, a choice, either liberation or a blind return to the cycle of rebirth. Most souls fail, not from weakness, but from ignorance. They don't realize that everything they see and hear after death is not reality, but a projection of their own untamed mind. And by the time realization dawns, it's too late. If this book speaks the truth, then the first few seconds after death matter more than the lifetime you just left behind. The moment your body ends is when your soul begins. You do not simply vanish into thin air. In its place, something else takes control, something that has been mentioned in ancient scriptures for more than 1,000 years before. It will feel as if you are waking up from a dream, as if you are weightless and unattached. In spite of the fact that there will be no more heartbeat and no more breath, you will still be conscious. Despite the fact that you will be aware that something has changed, your mind will have a difficult time accepting it. This moment will feel strangely familiar to you if you have ever experienced an experience in which you were out of your body. With the exception that there is no turning back this time, then the event takes place. It is a light that is so intense and so overwhelming that it seems to dissolve into your very being. It is a light that is blinding and brilliant. The Tibetan Book of the Dead utilizes the term clear light of reality to describe this phenomenon. In the event that you acknowledge it and give in to it in its entirety, you will eventually become one with it. By gaining instant enlightenment and therefore escaping reincarnation for all time, you will be able to transcend the cycle of birth and death with this practice. This is the ultimate moment of emancipation, and it occurs the moment when you pass away, the moment of death. However, a minority of people are aware of it. How come? Simply because we have been socialized to be afraid of the unknown. Clinging to its memories, its identity, and its unfulfilled wants, the soul experiences a state of fear. It does not accept the light, but rather pulls away from it. Moreover, the illusions start to take shape the instant fear takes over. You will begin to hear sounds, whispers, and echoes of voices that are familiar to you but strangely distorted, as if they are calling out to you from behind a curtain. As the world around you undergoes a transformation, you will notice that instead of light, you will start to see shadows, patterns, and forms, as well as glimpses of people or places that you have previously seen. As of right now, however, none of it is actual. It is the mind that is grasping, striving for meaning, and in doing so, it is beginning to create the very reality that will define the rest of your journey. This is where the majority of spirits become disoriented. Rather than acknowledging death as a chance for emancipation, they allow themselves to get distracted by perplexity. They look for solace in circumstances that are familiar to them, and their minds respond by projecting the world that they were formerly accustomed with, reproducing familiar sights, voices, and faces. Some people even saw religious figures throughout their lives that they revered, but they are unaware that these images are also just manifestations of their subconscious beliefs. It would be possible for them to let go if they were aware of the reality that none of it is real and that they are being tested. However, rather than following these visions, they continue to follow them deeper into the bardo, which is the state that exists between death and revival. In the immediate aftermath of death, the first few moments are the most crucial. Those who have prepared themselves for this moment are able to pass through the illusions and break free, according to the teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which claim that mindfulness is the key. What follows, however, is unavoidable for individuals who are not well prepared and for those who continue to cling to their previous lives. During the course of the voyage, which will last for a total of 49 days, they will see visions that will either lead them to enlightenment or keep them stuck in yet another cycle of reincarnation. Although we are about to enter the next stage of the adventure, It is important that you are aware of this information before we proceed farther into the prohibited knowledge of the bardo. When it comes to the afterlife, there are some of the most profound facts that cannot be discussed openly. Consequently, we divulge them within Insights Academy, which is our complimentary newsletter, where we investigate topics that are not permitted to be published here. A free copy of the Kybalion, a book of secret wisdom that has been studied for generations, will be given to you if you sign up right now by clicking on the link that is provided in the description. Waiting for you is the bardo. Despite the fact that the journey through the realm between worlds has only begun, the illusions are already beginning to take shape. At this moment, you are in the bardo, which is the transitional state between this life and the next. Time does not move in the same manner as it did when you were still living. Despite the fact that days can pass in an instant, seconds might feel like they last forever. You are merely conscious. You do not possess a body or one's speech. But this is where the issue lies. The majority of people are unaware that they have passed away. They are unable to accept the fact that all they formerly knew is no longer real, and they are stuck in a state that is similar to a dream. They are clinging to the echoes of their previous life. A moving and unstable domain, the bardo is described as such in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It is a place where reality bends and distorts, where thoughts become things, and where the mind itself generates the experience. Everything that was buried in life, including every fear, every ambition, and every secret feeling, is now taking shape. There are exactly 49 days that pass during the journey through this world, which is a procedure that takes place in stages and is terrifying for the majority of people. Confusion is there at the beginning of the process. The soul makes an effort to go back to its family and the people it cares about so much. It hovers around in places that are familiar to it, attempting to communicate and attempt to be noticed. However, there is no response from anyone. Nobody is able to hear. The realization starts to take hold of the situation. I am not dreaming about this. This is the end time. In spite of this, the mind continues to defy. It stubbornly refuses to accept the unavoidable and clings to its identity. It looks for solace, rationality, explanations, and anything else that it can cling to. On the other hand, the bardo does not offer any solace, because it is not a place of rest. It is a point of transformation, where the soul must confront itself in its most unadulterated form. When first encountered, the experience is unremarkable and even tranquil. Awareness is the only thing that exists. There is no bodily pain or sorrow. There are others who describe the stage as being similar to floating across an infinite ocean, a formless void, in a place where thoughts spread out like waves in an infinite ocean. On the other hand, gradually, visions start to materialize. Gentle and friendly are the initial visions that appear. There are beings that come that are dazzling and beautiful, and some people may perceive them as angels, enlightened masters, or spiritual guides. There is an overpowering sense of tranquility emanating from these figures, along with love and wisdom. They provide a means of escape, a way to achieve transcendence. However, it is necessary for the soul to acknowledge them for what they are, which are reflections of their own greater consciousness. If the soul is able to attain this understanding, it will be able to join with them, dissolving into a higher level of awareness and therefore permanently escaping the cycle of rebirth. However, the majority of them do not. They are uncertain, they have reservations, and all that is required is a moment of doubt. The images start to take on new forms. The luminous entities will eventually disappear, and in their stead, shadows will form. The tranquil figures begin to get deformed, and their features begin to take on increasingly hideous looks. The voices, which were once comforting, now become a whisper of uncertainty and worry. The paradise that was once there is beginning to transform into something more sinister. The next step of the bardo is the test of illusions, which is the present moment. It is not true that these scary beings are demons. They are not disciplinary measures. They are projections of the soul's own thoughts, including the soul's regrets, its concealed guilt, and its fears that have not been processed. Everything that one experiences in the bardo is a reflection of their own awareness, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which has a warning about this. This is not a judgment from the outside world, but rather a confrontation from within. Because the more fear that takes hold, the more powerful the illusions grow. This is the point in the journey that the adventure risks becoming dangerous. There is more to the bardo than just a site of transition. In other words, it is a mirror that displays all that the soul does not want to confront. And such reflection is intolerable for the majority of people. The actual test is about to start, and the destiny of the soul will be determined by what it sees in the next moment. First, the visions have a divine quality to them. The soul is able to perceive heavenly landscapes, luminous beings, and beings that are completely compassionate. The presence of these brilliant creatures exudes an incredible sense of tranquility, despite the fact that they do not communicate verbally. Angels, enlightened masters, and even gods are some of the names often used to characterize those who have had near-death states. They are neither saviors nor judges, but in reality, they are neither. They are manifestations of the soul's own utmost potential, reflecting the light of the soul in its purest state. It is possible for the soul to transcend if it acknowledges them. However, recognition necessitates clarity, and when the mind is confused by fear, clarity has a tough time being achieved. In the case of those who have spent their entire lives pursuing their goals, avoiding death, or clinging to their identity, the illusions start to become distorted. Although the radiant beings continue to exist, their forms are beginning to change. As if reality itself is beginning to crumble, the soul observes them flickering and twisting in and out of shapes. After that, in the same instant that they initially arrived, they start to disappear. And in their stead, the images of anger come into view. An unsettling level of detail is provided in the Tibetan Book of the Dead to explain this moment. As time goes on in the bardo, the figures who were once so reassuring disappear, and they are replaced by ominous and hideous beings. When compared to anything else that the soul has ever experienced, these beings are beyond terrible. At the same time that their features are contorted in expressions of wrath and turmoil, they yell with voices that are monstrous. Some of them have a multitude of heads, an infinite number of arms, or eyes that are set on fire. Whether they take the form of demons, executioners, or unrelenting pursuit, they strike fear into the heart of the soul of the one who is not adequately prepared. This is the point at which the majority of souls experience panic. Even though they run, beg, and scream, there is no way for them to escape because there is nothing from which they can free themselves. It is not true that these terrible beings are one's foes. There is no such thing as an external reality. The projections of the soul's own unresolved worries, its secret guilt, and its buried regrets are what they are seen to be. Each and every instance of dishonesty, cruelty, or selfishness that occurred in the past takes shape in the bardo, giving the impression of being something external or something that is attacking. However, the attack was a result of the attacker's own actions. Self-inflicted horror is not a surprise. In addition, the most perilous aspect is that the more the soul struggles, the more powerful the visions eventually become. This delusion is fueled by fear. It gains strength through terror. It is not possible to flee. Rather, the only way to escape is to acknowledge. Individuals who have come to the realization that these things are nothing more than shadows of the mind are the ones who have realized the truth. Take a look at how quickly they vanish, just like a mist that has been blasted away by the sun. In the instant when the spirit ceases believing in them, the illusions disappear. On the other hand, practically nobody comprehends this at the time. It is simply the nightmare that they see, and not the lesson that is concealed within it. The second significant test of the afterlife is about to take place. To begin, there was a test of consciousness that consisted of perceiving the clear light. Recognizing the illusions of fear is the second. This is a test of one's ability to master oneself. Those individuals who are unable to pass this examination are drawn deeper into the bardo, further into the cycle of karma, and are unable to escape from it again. The majority of people experience terror for a period of weeks. According to the Book of the Dead, the soul reaches its next obstacle sometime between the third and fourth week of its existence, which is a comprehensive evaluation of its previous life. Moreover, there is no place to conceal oneself this time. When it comes to determining your fate, there is no judge, no divine tribunal, and no transcendent person. What follows is a much more deep and horrific event than what really takes place. It is referred to as the Great Mirror in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, And it is a moment in time when the soul is compelled to confront the significance of its existence in its entirety. At first glance, it appears as though nothing is taking place. There is a brief period when the soul has the sensation that it has escaped from the wrathful illusions that are beginning to melt away. Then, however, a new experience begins to take hold, one that is more vivid and intense than anything that has come before it. There is no vision in this. This is not a fairy tale. It is a reliving experience. The soul is pulled backward through time, through every action, every thought, and every feeling that it has ever made. This, however, is not a recollection. This is a complete immersion. One does not just remember the things that it did during one's lifetime. It goes through the entire process once more. Currently, every single act of compassion, every single act of cruelty, and every single decision that was made in secret is being felt to its fullest extent, not just from its own point of view, but also from the point of view of everyone that it has ever affected. You will experience the pain that you produced if you caused it. If you bring delight to others, you will experience that joy yourself. However, there is no filter, and there is no way to rationalize or excuse decisions that have been made in the past. Every single thing is unfiltered, instantaneous, and defensible. This is not a form of discipline. This is the bare truth. The soul is not being evaluated by any external power during this process. It is evaluating itself. It is explained in the Tibetan writings that this experience is excruciating for the majority of people. A significant portion of our life is spent evading responsibility for our actions, defending our errors, and burying our feelings of guilt. However, after one passes away, there is nowhere to hide. You are not permitted to describe the reasons behind your behavior in any way. It is not possible for you to argue, deflect, or explain your way out of this situation. It is only possible to feel. This experience can be filled with joy for certain people. If a person lives their life with compassion, honesty, and intelligence, then they will experience an overwhelming sense of calm because every positive deed will come back to them like waves of light. On the other hand, for other people, it is an agony that is beyond anything they could have ever imagined. The reason for this is not because they are being punished, but rather because the consequences of their own conduct are crashing down from above. This is the reckoning, and there is no room for escape from it. However, this is where things take an even more unexpected turn. According to the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, this assessment of one's life not only has an impact on the past, but it also has the ability to influence the future. When the soul has experienced everything that it has ever been through, it is no longer in a state of neutrality. The feelings that it has recently re-experienced have a profound impact on its cognitive processes. It is possible that the soul will be lured back into the cycle of reincarnation if it emerges from this evaluation feeling guilty, regretful, or attached to something important. To a greater extent, the weight will return to a lower realm as it becomes heavier. Rather than being reborn into sorrow, poverty, or struggle as a result of the judgment of others, some people are reborn into these conditions because their own mental state drives them toward them. Without even being aware of it, the soul is making a decision. The life review is not merely a reflection, rather it is a test because of this reason. A test to determine whether or not the soul is capable of letting go. If it is able to have a detached acceptance of its history. If it is able to free one from the load of regret, dread, and desires that have not been fulfilled. Those individuals who are successful in passing the examination will progress toward emancipation. They are drawn back into another life, another body, and another round of battle. Those who fail are returned to this circle. Spiritual cultures place a strong emphasis on making preparations for death well in advance of its actual arrival. The reason for this is that when the time comes when the enormous mirror is placed in front of you, the things that you see are no longer directly within your control. It has already been written by the life that you have led, and the ultimate test will commence sometime between the 4th and 5th week of your time spent in the bardo. Now is the time for the soul to make its ultimate decision, either to break free or to be reborn. The bardo must soon come to an end. The illusions have been successful in their deception. Each and every delight, every pain, and every secret thought that created the soul's life has been relived, and the soul has confronted its own history. Now that we have been vacillating between the two options for some weeks, the time has come to make a decision. The last test, the one that will decide everything, is now being administered. This stage is characterized as the most crucial and difficult phase of all in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It is also the most difficult moment. At this moment, the soul is at a fork in the road. It is necessary for it to make a decision. Either it will acknowledge the illusions and be liberated for all time, or it will give in to its cravings and eventually return to the cycle of reincarnation. But this is where the issue lies. As a rule, people are unaware that they are making a decision. At this stage, the illusions have turned into something so powerful and convincing that the soul hardly remembers that it is in the bardo at all. From this point forward, the visions take on a new form, one that is distinct from everything that came before it. At this point, they are no longer threatening deities or hallucinations that are fractured. On the contrary, they become easy to recognize, reassuring, and even seductive. It is foretold in the Book of the Dead that during these last days, the soul will be presented with an opportunity to escape. However, this is a trap. It is able to view glimpses of loved ones communicating with it. There are places that are familiar to it, which evoke feelings of warmth and nostalgia, a profound yearning and a pull towards something that is recognizable or experienced by the soul. These are not merely hallucinations. Rather, they are depictions of the life that it is about to join after this one. With the beginning of the next incarnation, the karmic forces have already began to weave the conditions that will be necessary for the soul's return. In the event that the soul clings to these visions and allows itself to be drawn in, it will be swept away into a new body, a new life, and yet another cycle of forgetting. A rebirth takes place in an instant. The method is automatic in nature. As soon as the soul becomes attached to a want, a fear, or an attachment, it is pulled into a new womb, a new reality, and it has no recollection of the decision that it has just made. According to the Book of the Dead, this is a period of profound amnesia, a moment in which the previous existence is dissolved and a new one begins. It is described as sinking into oblivion. It is as if one were to awaken from a dream, with no recollection of the origin of the dream that just occurred. Therefore, the cycle starts all over again. The bardo is the place of birth, sorrow, and death, as well as another return. But the ultimate test is different for the few individuals who have prepared themselves. Those who are aware of what is taking place are able to see through the apparent illusion. They are aware that the sights are nothing more than imaginative projections, mental tricks that are intended to keep them confined. Not only do they not cling to the solace of previous ties, but they also do not shrink back in terror. They do not move, but they are conscious and separate. And at that same instant, an extraordinary occurrence takes place. There is a breakdown of illusions. Karmic forces are unable to maintain their hold. It becomes less appealing to seek rebirth. In addition, the soul, which is liberated from attachment and fear, is able to entirely transcend the cycle. Liberation is the term that the Tibetan teachers use to describe this. According to the majority of people's conceptions, it is not a location, it is not heaven, and it is not an afterlife. Simply waking up to what has always been there, awakening to a condition that is beyond illusion, beyond duality, and beyond pain will do this. But practically, no one ever reaches this state because it takes something that the majority of people never prepare for. Consciousness at the moment of death, the ability to notice the trap before it closes. This is something that nearly no one ever achieves. In addition, this is the reason why these lessons remain concealed for more than 1,000 years. The reason for this is because if people were to learn the reality about death, it would completely alter everything. The second part of this voyage is not only about what happens after death, it is also about the reasons why those who knew this information were banned to know it for generations. These teachings were kept secret from the general public and censored by religious institutions for more than 1,000 years. They were only accessible to the highest advanced spiritual practitioners and were kept hidden from the general public. To this day, the vast majority of people, have never even heard of them. Moreover, there is a rationale behind that. There was never any intention of the Tibetan Book of the Dead being read by the average person. For those who were not well prepared, it was regarded as being excessively powerful and hazardous. Because if individuals had a genuine understanding of what happens after death, it would completely destroy everything they hold dear, including their fears, their beliefs, and their entire vision of the world around them. Give it some thought. In the event if death is not an end, if it is not a punishment, and if there is no divine judgment, then what happens to the control systems that are constructed on the exact notions that are being discussed? The structure of society as we know it would disintegrate, governments would lose their influence, and religions would fall apart. Religious institutions have been preaching about heaven and hell, about divine punishment, and about the necessity of obeying higher authority in order to ensure a place in the hereafter for ages. The objective of these narratives is to serve, in command. If individuals are under the impression that their destiny after death is determined by an outside force, then they will conform, they will follow, and they will be afraid. On the other hand, what if the reality is that you are the only person who is evaluating you? Is it true that the hereafter is not about punishment or reward, but rather about your own thinking reflecting back at you? This information was concealed because it would disprove the notion that salvation is obtained from a source that is external to the individual. People would be compelled to deal with something that is significantly more terrible, namely the realization that they are solely responsible for their own destiny. Moreover, it is not all. There are some aspects of these old beliefs that are beginning to be confirmed by modern science. There is a striking similarity between the narratives of near-death experiences, sometimes known as NDEs. Individuals have reported experiencing the clear light, coming face to face with their life review, and experiencing either an overpowering sensation of serenity or terror, depending on the activities they take in their lives. Even the most advanced quantum physics is beginning to express the possibility that consciousness is not bound to the brain, that it may continue to exist beyond death, and that it may function outside the confines of time and space. Over the course of several centuries, this information was dismissed as superstition. The distinctions between ancient knowledge and contemporary scientific understanding are beginning to blur, however. What is the reason that not many people are aware of this? The reason for this is because the system is meant to keep you distracted, to keep you focused on the material world, on ephemeral pleasures, on meaningless anxieties, to keep you seeking money, position, and validation, so that by the time death occurs, you are all absolutely unprepared. That death is a mystery is the most significant untruth that has ever been told about it. It is not the case. More than 1,000 years ago, the Tibetan sages were the ones who mapped it out. They came to the realization that the first 49 days after death adhere to a specific pattern, that the mind is responsible for shaping its own afterlife, and that consciousness is the sole path to achieving freedom. In spite of this, hardly nobody is making preparations for it, due to the fact that this is the true secret. Because if you are not conscious while you are alive, you will not be cognizant when you pass away. This indicates that the cycle will continue to repeat itself over and over again. One alternative exists, however, for individuals who are aware of the reality of the situation and who start making preparations right once. The events that are to follow are even more significant. Assuming that this information is accurate, the next question that arises is not just about what occurs after death. Rather, it is about whether or not we are completely failing the test. If the Tibetan Book of the Dead is accurate, then the majority of us are already stuck in a cycle that will continue to repeat itself. It is not because we are incapable or worthless. Rather, it is because we are totally unprepared, because we are absolutely unprepared. Keep an eye out. The number of people who spend their entire lives contemplating death, let alone making preparations for it, is staggering. Our culture has taught us to be afraid of it, to disregard it, and to act as if it just does not exist. Despite the fact that we are aware that our time will come, we continue to divert our attention with activities such as employment, entertainment, financial gain, and pointless pleasures. When that happens, we will be just as lost as the billions of people who came before us, unable to see, bewildered, and caught in the same trap as before. Because the true test does not take place after one has passed on. There is a current occurrence of it. The bardo is not merely a location in the afterlife. Rather, it is a mental condition that one adopts. In life, we are already being fooled by the same illusions that trick the soul when it crosses over to the afterlife. The same fear that keeps souls running away from the wrathful visions is the same fear that dominates individuals on a daily basis. This attachment is the same attachment that keeps individuals seeking after money, fame, and fleeting pleasures. It is the attachment that draws souls back into rebirth. The blindness that causes individuals to believe everything they are told and never question the reality that is in front of them is the same blindness that causes them to be unable to perceive illusions. If you are not conscious at this moment, do not expect to be cognizant after you have passed away. This is the reason why so few people manage to escape. According to the teachings of the Book of the Dead, the same routines, anxieties, and aspirations that define our life on a daily basis also affect what happens to us once we pass away. Ignorance is a death sentence for those who choose to endure it. Individuals who are governed by fear in their lives will continue to be governed by fear when they pass on. Those who spend their lives chasing after illusions will continue to do so even after their physical bodies have been removed. This loop never stops happening. It is designed in such a way that it will keep us confined. The saddest part is that we are the ones who are doing it to ourselves. It is a fact that the majority of people will never comprehend. It is not impossible to break the cycle. For a specific reason, the Tibetan masters left behind these teachings, and that reason is to allow those select individuals who are prepared to awaken. And the first thing that needs to be done is to face reality as it actually is. The majority of people will continue to live their lives in the same manner that they have always done. They are going to convince themselves that they have time, that they will ponder about death at a later time, and that there are other things that are more important to concentrate on right now. Then, just like that, their life will come to an end in an instant, and they will enter the bardo in the same state of bewilderment and disorientation as every other soul that came before them. Everything, however, shifts in a different direction for those individuals who wake up now and start breaking the cycle before it is too late. Since planning does not take place once a person has passed away, the event takes place while you are still present. When it comes to preparation, religion, dogma, or rituals are not taken into consideration. It all comes down to awareness, with regard to recognizing the illusions for what they truly are. The process of liberating ourselves from the anxieties, wants, and false identities that keep us confined, not only in this life, but also in the life to come, due to the fact that the subject of what occurs after death is no longer relevant. The true question is whether or not we have already passed on. The majority of people will move on and forget what they have just learned. The distractions, rituals, and predetermined existence that they have become accustomed to will return to them. But those few who comprehend will be aware that this moment marks a turning point in the story. However, the nature of the question has become even more pressing. If our way of life is the determining factor in what happens to us when we pass away, then how do we get ready? What steps can we take to break the cycle before it is past our time? The solution is much less complicated than you might assume. If passing away is a test, then life is the textbook to learn from. The problem, however, is that the vast majority of people are unaware that they are being evaluated. They live their lives as if there is no end. It is as if death is some unforeseeable occurrence that will not occur for a very long time. In the end, it does happen one day. According to the teachings of the Tibetan masters, the only way to achieve consciousness in death is to achieve consciousness in life. If you spend your entire life trying to escape reality, distracting yourself with fleeting pleasures, and avoiding in-depth introspection, then when the time comes, you will be entirely unprepared for whatever comes your way. You are going to cling to your identity, to your worries, and to the regrets that you have. Moreover, if you do this, you will be drawn back into the loop, and you will find yourself once more immersed in illusion. But there is an additional approach. Detachment is the first step in the process of being ready for death. It is not in the sense of denying the existence of life. Rather, it is in the sense of not being influenced by it. The desires of the majority of people tend to enslave them. In the belief that these things will bring them happiness, they pursue things such as money, affirmation, prestige, and relationships. On the other hand, none of this matters in the bardo. Your state of consciousness is the sole factor that can decide what happens to you throughout your life. The more one is attached to the material world, the more difficult it will be for them to let go of that attachment. Additionally, the more difficult it is to let go, the greater the likelihood that you will be reborn into another life of suffering, another cycle of forgetting something. It is not necessary to give up everything and live in seclusion in order to achieve detachment. To have mastery over your mind implies to acquire the ability to exercise control over your thoughts, rather than allowing them to control you. In other words, it implies having the realization that nothing in this world is everlasting, not even your identity, not even your physical body, not even your assets. You will no longer be afraid of death once you have a complete understanding of this. It is awareness that is the second stage. In the same way that life is a domain of illusions, the bardo is as well. At this very moment, all that you perceive and everything that you think is a projection of your mind, which has been sculpted by indoctrination, phobias, and other influences from the outside world. If you do not acquire the ability to see through the illusions immediately, you will not be able to do so after you have passed away. Not as religious rituals, but rather as preparation for the ultimate examination. Meditation, self-inquiry, and profound thought are the techniques that are essential to achieving freedom. Before entering the afterlife, the mind needs to be trained in the same way that an athlete trains their body before a competition and before they face the afterlife, simply because at that precise instant, your thoughts transform into your actuality. Fear, uncertainty, and confusion are the emotions that will devour you as you pass away if you have spent your entire life reacting with these emotions. In contrast, if you have spent your entire life working to cultivate clarity, presence, and detachment, then you will be able to discern the illusions for what they truly are when you reach the bardo. That you will not flee, they will not cling to you. During this time, you will be free, aware, and still. Because of this, there is a distinction between those who are able to escape and those who are unable to leave. Acceptance is the third and last phase in the process. There is no reason to be afraid of death, nor is it something that should be avoided while thinking about it. At this same time, everything is revealed to you, making it the most significant moment of your complete existence. You will be dominated by fear in the afterlife if you spend your life as if you are afraid of it. On the other hand, if you accept it as the natural shift that it is, you will approach it with serenity rather than panic. It was not because the ancient masters were fascinated with death that they spent their entire lives preparing for this time. Rather, it was because they realized that life and death are the same thing. There is no way to perfect one without mastering the other. Moreover, this is the reason why people are kept distracted by modern culture. Because a world full of people who do not have a fear of death is a world full of people who cannot be controlled. It is impossible to govern them. If you are able to comprehend this, then you are already distinct from the majority of people. You are already beginning to awaken. Nevertheless, there is one additional reality that you must be aware of. Therefore, everything that we have talked about, including everything about the bardo, everything about illusions, and everything about breaking free, is pointless unless you are aware of this last truth. The vast majority of people will never make preparations for their own deaths. They will go through life without any sense of direction, engulfed by distractions, racing after illusions, and being terrified by things that they do not comprehend. In addition, when the time comes, they will be hurled into the bardo, where they will be disoriented, lost, and unprepared, just as they were in life. The final reality, however, is as follows. The act of dying does not alter you. Only you are revealed by it. In contrast to what the majority of people believe, the Tibetan Book of the Dead does not provide a description of an afterlife. The promise of a paradise for the righteous and a hell for the wicked is not included in this. In no way does it pass judgment on any individual, due to the fact that the bardo is not an exterior location. You can think of it as a reflection of your own consciousness. Everything that you will experience after death, including the clear light, the serene deities, the scary illusions, the life review, and the drive toward reincarnation, is nothing more than a reflection of the thought that you carried with you during your lifetime. You will die in fear if you have continued to live in dread. When you lived in attachment, you would end up dying by clinging to something that has already passed away. In the event that you were asleep during your existence, you would continue to exist in the afterlife in the same manner, reacting, clutching, and falling back into the cycle. If, on the other hand, you spent your life with awareness, if you taught your mind to see through illusions, and if you prepared yourself while you were still living, then when you meet the bardo in death, you will identify it for what it truly is. an examination, a change, and a chance to flourish. This is the secret that has been kept hidden for more than 1,000 years. What was the cause for the prohibition of these teachings? Simply because if people were aware of the reality, they would no longer be afraid of dying. In other words, they would cease squandering their lives on things that are of little consequence. It would be no longer necessary for them to be controlled by erroneous beliefs, by religious institutions, or by governments that employ fear in order to maintain their obedience. It is impossible to exert influence over a person who has a firm grasp on the concept of death. The reason for this is that everything shifts once you realize the truth and realize that this life is nothing more than a preparation for the next existence. The manner in which you think shifts. There is a shift in your behavior. The pursuit of fleeting pleasures or useless distractions is no longer what you do. Because you are aware that nothing was ever yours to begin with, you no longer have any fear of losing something. Since you have come to the realization that your identity was never true, you no longer cling to it. And when the time comes, when you draw your last breath and cross the threshold, you will not be overcome with fear. You will not be able to grasp. There will be no recurrence of the cycle of forgetting that you have experienced. You will merely be conscious of it. When you reach that level of awareness, you will be presented with a choice, a genuine choice, to either break free or to regress. At this point, the majority will never arrive. They will forget all they have just learned, move on from this film, and return to their routines instead of continuing to watch it. To add insult to injury, they will be unprepared when the time comes. However, you are not need to be. You are already exceptional in comparison to the majority of people if you have made it this far. As of right now, you are looking, consequently, this is the reason why we delve even further into the Insights Academy, where we divulge information that is not permitted to be spoken here. In light of the fact that the mind is the only thing that can decide what occurs next, sign up right now by clicking on the link provided in the description, and you will be given a free copy of the Kybalion. However, unless you comprehend this ultimate reality, everything that you have just learned is completely pointless. It is a truth that has been concealed in classified materials held by the government, a reality that elucidates the specifics of what occurs after death in a manner that even the Tibetan Book of the Dead is unable to explain. To find out what they did not want you to know, you can find out by clicking on the video that is currently displayed here. Let us know by leaving a comment if you found this video to be meaningful to you. I completely understand.